Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize in advance that I was not able to join you in person. I'd had a scheduling conflict, unfortunately, was attending to attend in person, but nevertheless, I'm glad to participate in this year's conference once again. This is my third time at ACIE, and I'll share my slides here. Today, I'm going to be talking about on becoming an effective change leader using Kotter's change model in higher education. You already know my name is Brad Colpitts, and I work in the School of Languages and Communication at Kobe University here in Kansai, Japan. A brief outline of today's discussion and presentation. I'll start with a bit of a background on higher education more generally, and then a brief primer on leadership theory, what it is and what it means. I'll then look to contrast management and leadership. What is the difference between these two concepts? And of course, the main focus of my presentation today is on Kotter's change model. If you've never heard about this, don't worry, I'm going to explain in detail what that is and how it applies to higher education. I'll briefly outline my research design, and then I'll get into some preliminary results as my research is still ongoing. I'll go over some quick resources, just a link you can follow via a QR code in case you're interested in following up or pursuing research yourself in the area of higher education leadership. And finally, I'll provide some contact info should you have any questions or if you want to get in touch regarding today's presentation. So starting with some background just on the current landscape of higher education, we now live in the knowledge economy. This simply means that nation states and their economies are premised largely on the production and development of intellectual property, and less so on the production of manufactured products, tangible products. Resultantly, in Asia, you're seeing a lot of universities adopting global rankings, including Times Higher Education and the QS University Rankings, as proxy indicators of their success. Of course, a problem with this is that these rankings tend to be skewed more towards research and less to teaching. So if your metric for assessing the success of a given higher education initiative is raising up your institution in these rankings, this is going to be focused more on your research output. Higher education is also facing a number of key disruptors. This includes digital preparedness. This obviously came to light during the pandemic when many institutions globally were caught unprepared to deliver online education effectively at that time. Of course, the big one that's emerged since has been artificial intelligence and how it's impacting how we teach and how we assess our students. There's other related issues. This includes declining trust in universities globally, certainly in the West and parts of Asia. Huge demographic shifts, of course, here in Japan. We're talking about one of the fastest aging societies in the world. As a result, you have fewer young people that are deciding to enter into higher education. And of course, that means the market is quite saturated. There aren't many more nooks and crannies from which institutions can find new students. And there's also lower public funding for higher education generally, which presents another slew of issues for these institutions. And amongst all this, I want to emphasize that leadership is the key to adaptability for organizations generally and universities or higher education institutions specifically. So if you don't know much about leadership theory, I want to give a quick primer because I think sort of defining the parameters of leadership theory helps sort of color the conversation as I move forward in today's presentation. So leadership theory is actually one of the most studied and oldest social sciences. It began with the great man theories, which largely were focused on examining and identifying great men. This is the official name given to these theories, not the one I chose, but it looked at characteristics of great men throughout history and then tried to identify common characteristics that they held. And these theories have evolved through a range of different theoretical foci, but at present, our understanding of leadership is much more nuanced. And we have also come to understand that Leadership is not really about any one individual. You can view leadership as formal versus informal. What I mean by this, at least in higher education, you have people in formal leadership positions. This could include directors, deans, provosts, directors, even administrators, people who are placed in those leadership positions, versus informal leadership, which is sort of the process of leadership that occurs throughout an organization. But because we know the majority of decision making in an organization does not occur at those executive levels. There's also the emergence of systems leadership. So this is viewing organizations as active systems where decisions made in one section or at one node can actually impact other areas of an organization, as well as hybrid leadership. So again, that idea that leadership occurs at different strata of an organization. One interesting part about higher education leadership that is unique to this field or this sector is that it often occurs on a rotational basis. And I mean, leaders in higher education aren't always chosen based on a meritocratic system where they're chosen for their skills as leaders. Instead, they excel as researchers or instructors and mentors. But this doesn't necessarily mean they have the skills or preparedness to lead an academic unit. And amidst all this, we're seeing the increasing view of leadership as a process. It's not the actions of an individual, but rather a process that occurs throughout an organization. Now, there's often this conflation between management and leadership, and sometimes in higher education between management and leadership and governance. But I'm just going to talk about these two concepts here and just give a brief outline of how they are conceptually different. Management includes regular processes that ensure stability. And of course, when you're overseeing change, management is important. Even though I'm emphasizing the key role of change leadership, this is not to say that management is not an important part of leading an organization. Management includes planning, budgeting, staffing, measuring outcomes, and problem solving as problems emerge. Leadership, by contrast, has to do with driving change and moving organizations forward. So this could be includes things like articulating a shared or collective or coherent vision for an organization. In our case, in higher education, it's aligning faculty to work towards this vision, inspiring people to partake in these changes. And oftentimes, I think, as I'll discuss later, this has to do with consulting various stakeholders and then creating an effective or a positive culture for faculty or members of an organization to participate in. And if you look at these two definitions, one key thing to consider is that while not all managers are leaders, all leaders definitionally have to be managers. To be an effective leader, you need those management skills. But managers are not always effective leaders themselves. So what is Kotter's change model? Well, John Kotter is the professor emeritus or a professor emeritus in Harvard Business School. He specializes in business leadership and change management practices and also runs his own consultancy from which he advises companies and other organizations on how to best institute effective change within their organizations. He has several prominent books. The one I will focus on today is Leading Change, which was first published in 1996. The version on your screen there is from 2012. And in this, he outlined his 8-step change model. In a more recent book, Accelerate, which I've also put up because I think it's quite interesting and sort of relevant to today's discussion, also looks at the structure of organizations and how you can incorporate that into that sort of 8-step model to better effectuate change in an organization. And this model has been used extensively in corporate, government, and educational contexts. So what exactly is this 8-step model? I'm going to try to outline this just briefly because I have a limited amount of time today. First, the first step is to establish a sense of urgency. This is establishing a compelling reason for change by highlighting key threats, opportunities, or challenges that demand immediate action. Essentially, this step is to make sure that people within the organization are prepared to get on board with the change and take part in it. If you don't do that, obviously, a lot of people enjoy the status quo because it's comfortable. Complacency is comfortable. Next, you have to create a guiding coalition. A guiding coalition is a strong leadership team that includes various key stakeholders who support and drive the change initiative. In higher education, this should probably also include formal leaders, as well as people at different strata within an organization. Next, you have to develop a vision and strategy. So creating a clear vision for the change and outlining clear and specific strategies to help achieve it. Pardon me. Next, and this is really important when we're talking about higher education, is communicating the change vision. This means consistently to share the vision and strategy across all levels of an organization to get widespread buy-in. And these four steps, we could say, are preparing for change, right? Next, we move into actually instituting change or implementing change. The first point here is empowering action. This includes removing barriers. This could be physical or psychological or intangible, or it can also include people. Removing barriers in the way of change, providing resources and encouraging employees to take the initiative in implementing this change. Another key point next, step 6, is generating short-term wins. So when you think about a long-term change in any organization, these things happen over years. To make sure that people stay on board, you need to have short-term wins as well that sort of help them or help remind them why this change is important and remind them that it's happening. Then you can use these short-term wins for step 7 to use that momentum to push forward, refine and adjust the processes, and to tackle deeper challenges that emerge. And then finally, the key point here, this last stage, is kind of anchoring this new approach in the culture. So we want this change to take root within the culture of an organization, and that means integrating new changes into like daily operations, policies, and the overall workplace culture of that organization. So why is Kotter so important or so popular, and why should we choose it in higher education? Well, one key bonus of this model is that it provides a step-by-step guide, like I said, that helps prepare for, implement, and then anchor change in an organization. It clearly links theory to practice. It's received endorsements from a lot of business executives, including being chosen as one of Time's 25 most influential management books. And it's really framed academic debate when it comes to change leadership. I actually just checked before I recorded this. It's now the book Leading Change alone has received more than 23,000 plus citations. Some criticisms you could level at it is it helps manufacture crisis and therefore sort of jeopardizes psychological safety of employees. Of course, the first step is creating a sense of urgency, though Kotter's most recent book helps address this by changing the lens we frame this from urgency to a big opportunity. There is some lack of empirical evidence to support the model, as it's largely based on Kotter's personal experience. As you've seen, the model is linear. It goes from steps 1 to 8 and somewhat rigid in this regard, and this might conflict with how higher education functions. And finally, it's a teleological model, meaning that it's unmoored from political, cultural, psychological, etc., other issues that might affect change, and it's very top-down with a predetermined outcome. When we think about its application in higher education, there are several examples of its use in higher education. I will briefly outline some of the similarities I found between these cases later, but there are comparatively few in-depth case studies. So that was a challenge I found when conducting this study. There's also a unique structure of higher education institutions compared to the private sector. If you look at the private sector, it's very much like a pyramid where you have the CEO at the top making decisions which are then pushed down to the executives, middle management, and employees. Whereas in higher education, we have a shared governance model. Faculties have say in what the decisions that are made in their own departments, and that leadership is more distributed throughout the organization. And again, does that linearity of the model contrast the dynamic and fluid nature of higher education contexts? So I wanted to look at various case studies and see how what similarities or differences I could find across the case studies when applying Kotter's higher education model in higher education contexts. And I also wanted to look at the challenges that they encountered. So, in order to do this, I leveraged a comparative case study. So, in a comparative case study, it emphasizes the phenomenon of interest. In this case, that's the Kotter Change Model, rather than the individual context, because obviously contextual factors can have implications for how effective the model could be. But what successes or challenges can I find across cases? And again, this helps me sort of, or helps the researcher escape that bounded context, the constraints of that one context, and look for horizontal. So that is similarities across the cases. Vertical, that's similarities on certain points in the cases. For example, in my study, this included success metrics, challenges encountered, the lengths of the studies, suggested modifications to the model, etc. And transversal refers to comparing the model over time. Now, I wanted to limit the studies I included to those that were published in the last 10 years because higher education is always evolving. As I've outlined already, there are some huge disruptions to the sector just in the last 10 years. And I also wanted to choose studies that were prescriptive. They adopted the model as a means of informing a higher education change rather than analytical, because a lot of the case studies you see are post hoc analyses of a change that occurred in an organization, but the change was not necessarily informed by Kotter's model. So it's hard to use these cases to assess the relative success um, or deficiencies in the model when it comes to applying it to higher education. I used a purposeful selection approach, looking for case studies that were available on ERIC, EBSCOhost, or Google Scholar. And to be fair, there weren't a lot of case studies that met all this inclusion criteria. For today's presentation, I've only outlined four. So going over my preliminary results, looking at the results across cases, one of the differences was the change foci. So these were quite varied. It included things like uh, updating a student evaluation system, changing faculty development incentives, or improving distance education at various institutions. By chance, the case studies I found that actually met my criteria, particularly those that were informed by the Kotter Change Model, all took place in the United States. There were others outside of that context, but they all tended to be post hoc analyses. There was also discussion of how the model had to be more flexible and iterative in the higher education context. Some of the case studies actually modified the steps, which I can speak to more later. A key challenge found across the cases was the problem of faculty resistance to change and the linearity of the model. Because of this resistance and other factors that emerged, the model couldn't always be followed from 1 to 8 in that exact order. And it also sort of emphasized the importance of faculty buy-in. There was also the central theme of the role of formal leaders participating in these change processes and the importance of having them participate as well. Now, if we look at it vertically by category, there was a distinction between top-down versus collaborative leadership. Most of the cases involved some involved formal leadership to some extent. Sometimes they were brought in after the fact to sort of to support and promote the initiative. Other times they were driving forces within the initiative itself. And there's some overlap here from horizontal to vertical, but you have that the linear application of the model versus iterative applications of the model. Two of the cases followed the linear progression. One repeated some steps. The other one was less clear in its application of the model. Again, the challenges encountered were faculty resistance. So this was similar across the various cases I examined. There were structural constraints that directly were related to that shared governance model. It's hard to prescribe change to an institution when you have distributed leadership or shared governance, where members of the organization have a say in what kind of change takes place. And one thing that really varied between the different cases was the success metric criteria. Each case had a unique metric for success or lacked clear metrics. There was no clear explanation of how the authors examined the efficacy of the change or how successful it was long term. And finally, looking at some results transversely or over time, that iterative point is really applying the model iteratively is important because it allows flexibility to address emergent challenges. So one example from one of the case studies is that 1 or 2 years into the change, they actually had several members of the guiding coalition either be transferred to other parts of the organization or they left the organization altogether. Therefore, they had to restructure that guiding coalition. And then they also talked about moving back to communicating the vision. So going steps 1, 2, 3, 4, back to 2, and then back to 4 to really ingrain the importance of the change. And the longer the project, the more important it is to get faculty buy-in. This is also, it helps with adaptability of the model and of the change implementation. So some key takeaways overall, universities just may require more flexibility than private organizations. This relates to several things or could be rooted in several things, including the structure of the organizations or how decision-making is done in universities or higher education institutions. You also have competing interests within these organizations that include administrators, students, faculty, and of course, executive leadership. Again, I have to underscore the importance of faculty engagement in a shared governance model. If you don't have faculty buy-in, it's hard to really implement and accelerate a change initiative in an organization where you have a shared governance model. The iterative use of the model is key because, again, universities are beholden to many different stakeholders. Depending on a given context, that can include also, I've said before, administrators, students, faculty, executive leadership, but also government, changing government, etc. So that iterative application of the model allows it to be more adaptive. And leaders have to act more as facilitators rather than dictators or taking a top-down approach that ensures that they are followed exactly as they say. So I wanted to finish. Obviously, I've been studying leadership in higher education, particularly in EFL context now since I started my PhD in 2017. I wanted to share some of the best resources, which includes books, journal articles, and some practical resources, including training programs and some particularly American leadership training societies that offer free materials for people interested in the subject. You can find those by following the QR code here. And of course, the purpose of these conferences, or the main reason I like them, is to communicate with people. So don't be shy about reaching out to me. You can contact me at the email on your screen or via any of the other social media that I've provided here. I've also offered a link to my latest publication on the topic of educational leadership. This appeared in the International Journal of Leadership in Education and was a result of my doctoral research. So I'll leave that up for you for a moment. So thank you very much again for your time. I hope you found this informative and enjoyable. I wish you the best of luck at the conference, and with any luck, I will see you again next year at ACIE 2026. Take care and God bless.